Hello, everybody. It is Monday. Happy Monday.
Monday. Hey, and the sun's starting to come out, finally. Maybe this rain's going to go away.
Looking forward to some warm weather, as we all are, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So, today we're talking about termites. Super exciting, but actually it's perfect timing. And before I get too ahead of myself here, just a reminder that our plan is to be here every other Monday, but life happens, and so sometimes we have to reschedule, but we appreciate you tuning in today. And if you ever have any pest questions in the meantime, you're always welcome to either reach out to us on Facebook or through our website, which is modernpest.com. So if you have questions, feel free to chime in at any time. We're happy to answer your questions directly. I have a list here for Mike already that I'm curious about. So
I'm betting Peyton Hart has questions about termites.
We're waiting. Peyton and Dawn. So great. So let's just get started with your basic, questions. For me, it's, I assume that termites eat wood. Is that true, or do they eat anything else?
No, that's what they eat. They eat wood. Yeah.
Do they eat certain types of wood, or just?
They actually prefer a wood that is softer, and they eat a certain part of the wood. They actually eat the spring wood of the wood. They will feed on. They'll feed on most any type of wood, but the harder the wood, the less likely it is that they will substantially damage it. Wood that has relatively high moisture content certainly is more attractive for them as well.
Oh, Don chimed in, sorry.
Oh, I knew he'd be there.
It's Peyton. We had it wrong. It's not Peyton. It's Peyton.
Oh, I'm sorry, Don.
And Peyton couldn't make it today. He's in Vienna at a sausage conference. But he's here, though.
I thought he was in Lisbon at the Sausage Kitchen, Don. There's a free plug.
So that's good to know. They definitely do have preferences on wood types, I guess. Then.
Yeah, but the type of wood that is used in construction is really what they actually like. So,
well, a little scary, but true. And so, where can they be found, and what should I be looking for termites?
Well, there's different types of termites. The most common in New England, certainly. Pretty much most of the East Coast, unless you get into the extreme southern part of the country, eastern subterraneans, and they actually live in the soil. So
they're not
unlike with ants and things like that, you don't really see them as much as you do a lot of types of insects because of that living in the soil, and they really need, in most cases, for subterranean termites, as the name indicates, they have to maintain contact with the soil. So you don't often actually see the termites themselves. You'll see the swarmers occasionally, which looks kind of similar to an ant, but there's a couple of key characteristics that can be used to distinguish them. Ants have constricted waist, what people refer to as a wasp waist, where it's like pinched in the center, which termites don't. And termites have 4 wings that are all equal size that have just a lot of veins in them. They're kind of translucent, but have kind of a sheen to them. They're fairly distinct if you've ever seen them. So
compared to an ant.
Yes, yeah.
Don asked, do termites building nests in structure or outside, like in an old stump or underground?
Mostly the colonies are underground. They certainly will feed. They certainly will feed in old stumps and decaying wood. Things of that nature. If you have a really bad moisture problem, you might possibly have a colony that gets isolated from the soil that can survive inside of a structure, but it's certainly not that common.
Right.
And again, that's with subterraneans. So
then how do I end up with termites in my home then if they need to be in the soil?
What's your house built on? Surrounded by soil, right? So termites are they're constantly foraging. Even if they've got a really good food source, there's still members in the colony that are just constantly out foraging, looking for new sources of food. So they just happen to encounter your home and decide, hey, this is a good place for a food source. They, just like most insects, use pheromones for communication. So they're leaving those pheromone trails, telling the others in the colony this is a good food source. So it's just really basically just random foraging. You were the unlucky person.
So how are they getting in then, most likely?
It depends on the construction, but usually what they're doing is they're building a mud tube from the soil up the side of the foundation. Sometimes it's inside the basement. If you got a house built on a slab, they may be in the soil underneath and find a crack in the slab that they'll come up through. But they build that mud tube to get from the soil to the food source, to the wood. So sometimes what you'll see, and it helps to maintain that moisture, that humidity inside the colony. So sometimes what you'll see is these little tubes going up the side of your foundation that, it depends on how long the colony's been there, how large it is, how much feeding there. Those tubes may be, just small, 1/8 of an inch, something like that, and it looks just like dried mud going up the side of the foundation.
Does it look, I've seen a picture, it almost reminds me of little veins of mud.
Yes,
almost.
yeah, yep.
Interesting, cool. So, are they active in the winter time?
It's an interesting question because unlike most insects go into diapause in cold weather if they're living outdoors, which is kind of the equivalent for a mammal for hibernation. But termites don't have the ability to do that. So basically, as the weather starts to get cool in the fall, they just move deeper into the soil, so they're below the frost line, but they remain active year-round. So they're probably not actively feeding on the wood, the structural, the wood inside your house in the winter in most cases, unless if you have a heated basement or if you have a house on a slab.
Right.
Especially if you had a house on a slab like with radiant heat, so the soil under the slab stays warm, then they may continue to be active throughout the winter.
So otherwise they're more seasonal as a result of...
As far as feeding on a structure, yes.
Okay. So Dawn asks, hi Dawn, do termites have any natural predators like spiders?
Spiders will feed on any kind of insect, so if they had the opportunity, and ants and termites will attack each other's colonies occasionally. But you have to think that most of these insects, as a norm, are living in the ground. So, if you had an ant colony that was living in the ground, they may attack the termite colony, but they're probably not going to substantially impact it and eliminate them.
We can't bring in more ants or spiders.
Probably not the solution. Well, and the spiders aren't, and the spiders aren't living in the soil.
Right.
So the few termites that a spider might kill would be, in the spring of the year when the termites swarm. You may find that find them in their webs, things like that.
Yeah. That makes sense. Good question, Don. So you mentioned there are different types of termites, so
yes.
we really only see the one type in this region?
As a rule, that's, I would say that would be the only one that you would find normally in New England that's kind of native to this part of the country. I have seen in almost 40 years now drywood termites a couple of times. And those, unlike what we're talking with subterraneans, those actually don't need to maintain contact with the soil. But typically, that's usually associated with a piece of furniture. We treated a boat at one time that was infested with drywood termites. A piano that originally came from Hawaii that had drywood termites. So, but it's pretty unusual.
Yeah. Makes sense. So I guess then, are there any reasons why termites are beneficial? Because I'm sure.
If they're living in the, Dawn mentioned the stump. If you've got an old tree that's been cut or knocked down or that type of a thing. I mean, they're turning that back into the soil, just like carpenter ants would do. So in the right setting, yeah, they can certainly be beneficial. But when they're, infesting the structure and doing damage to a building, yeah, there's nothing beneficial about them.
So then what kind of risks are associated with termites in my home? What kind of damage can they do?
What kind of damage? It really depends on, the problem with termites is because they do live in the soil, you don't see them, again, like with ants, you see them foraging around, they're looking for food. Your house is the food source for the termites, so you don't see them, and they actually are feeding on the wood. An average termite colony can consume a little over 2 feet of wood of a 2x4 in about a year. But that damage can go on for years and years and years without you realizing it. And they may be feeding in multiple spots in the house too. So, yeah, this piece of wood actually, this actually used to be a 2x10.
Over a little bit. Yeah, there we go.
And it was one of 3 that were spiked together as a carrying beam in a house.
Wow.
Yes. Well, they're living in the soil, so typically where they're feeding is going to be on the lower portion of the house, which is where your heavier framing members are that are actually supporting the structure above it. And you can see, they eat the layers of wood. They basically eat the spring wood, which is the softer part of the wood that you get, the new growth every spring that really is, that really provides the sap and the nourishment for the tree. So they're basically feeding on that. So you end up with these, it looks like layers. And then this is all the mud that they've brought up in here as they're feeding. So it's similar to carpenter ant damage, but it's not nice and smooth and clean like you see with carpenter ant damage. But that's an example of what they can do. And interestingly, because a lot of people think, especially the northern part of the territory that we service, people think, Maine, there's really not a lot of termites. This came out of a house in Bristol, Maine. So they are definitely here. Yes.
And Don asked, what typically causes more damage, termites or carpenter ants?
Termites definitely cause more damage, simply because the damage a lot of times is hidden like this. You don't see it.
Right.
This would not be exposed open like this. This actually had another 2x10 spiked to it, and the outside of it, you look at the piece of wood, and it will look like it's basically pretty much solid. Yeah. But if you take a screwdriver or something for a probe and start probing that wood, it will go right through it. In this situation, there were 3 2x10s spiked together, and I took a long screwdriver and went through 2 of the 2x10s, and if I'd given it a little tap, probably could have gone through the 3rd one.
Wow, that's scary. Your house up.
Yeah. And they had definitely been there for a while, feeding on this house with the homeowners having no idea. They actually started finding aerial tubes where the termites had gone so far from the foundation, from the soil that they were living in, had come up the foundation across towards the center of the house, and had fed on those beams going across. And there was a lot of activity right above the furnace, which is pretty common because it's really nice and warm. But if they get far enough away from their source of moisture, those mud tubes that you see going from the soil up, they will actually try to build a mud tube from where they're feeding back down to get to the soil. So these people were finding crumbs of the mud and stuff on things in the basement, and there were these tubes that were starting to come down. That was their first indication that they had a problem. And they probably, based on the amount of damage, they probably had been in this house for, well over a decade.
Wow. That's crazy. Now, it's my understanding, and I don't know if you know the answer, that often homeowners insurance will not cover that sort of damage.
I'm not going to give legal advice, and I'm not an insurance agent, but my understanding is that typically a typical homeowner's policy does not cover that.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So definitely want to be on top of that. Are there ways that, a homeowner could treat or even prevent termites on their own?
There are certainly things you can do to help minimize the risk. I won't say you could totally prevent them, but if you have any soil to wood contact, eliminating that, reducing the amount of moisture around the house. So if you've got landscaping, plants, things like that that come up really close to the foundation, a lot of times people plant plants and they plant it, this far from the house, and they don't think about that when that gets larger, it's going to be like this. So it blocks the airflow. The house doesn't have a chance to dry out. So keeping those things out away from the foundation so that you get some air circulation, it contains less moisture. It's going to be less conducive for termites, for carpenter ants, just for most pests in general require a fairly substantial amount of moisture. So things like that, plus by having, your plants and your shrubs and things out away from the foundation a little bit, it allows you to be able to actually see. So if there's a mud tube, right, so if there's a mud tube going up the foundation, if it's open where you can see it, you may catch that much quicker than you would if you've got shrubs that are brushed right up against the house where you can't see behind them.
Right, yeah. All right, so how long do termite colonies typically live? I mean, you mentioned one that sounded like it was
the colony itself, the colony itself will live for years. An average termite will only live for a year or two, but the colony itself will just continue to keep multiplying and getting bigger and bigger. Mm-hmm. An average subterranean termite colony, a mature colony, which is probably 3 to 4 years for it to really become a really well-established mature colony before it will produce swarmers, is usually at least 60,000 individual termites.
So if you see swarmers, which usually it's this time of year, correct?
Yeah, it's usually in the spring, and it's still a little bit cool, but all this rainy weather that we've had, termites usually swarm shortly after a warm rain, like the day following a warm rain. So it's been a little cool, the rain that we've had, but it's going to get warmer this week. We may have termites swarming later this week. Certainly once the weather starts to get warm, you start getting, those days where it's in the 70s and 80s like it should be now. Well, I guess really it shouldn't. It just seems like it should. That we want it to be, then that's a very common time for them to swarm.
Now, when we see swarmers like that near our home, is that a pretty big indication that we've got something going on, or
if you see swarmers, you definitely want to have somebody come and inspect it. You definitely want to make sure. Yeah, I would highly recommend that. Yes. Yes.
Just to make sure you don't have infestation inside.
Yes, and if you're finding something that you think may be a termite swarmer, everybody carries around a camera nowadays. If you can get a fairly good close-up picture and send to us, we can probably tell you whether that's a termite swarmer or an ant.
Right. All right. And I think we pretty much covered that question. But this is an interesting one. Do termites bite? Do they bite humans typically?
No. I would say if, and there's different castes in the termite colony. If you broke open a mud tube that is active, the soldiers will immediately respond to that. And they've got pretty large mandibles where they could pinch you, but they're not actually going to bite you.
Okay. And so, in your experience, because we know you've been in the business a while, what's the worst damage you've ever seen as a result of termites?
What's the worst damage I've ever seen? Well, this was pretty substantial damage when you take in consideration that the people had to have a contractor come in, put in supports in areas adjacent to this and take out a carrying, probably 12 to 15 feet of a beam that was a main beam that was supporting the house. I've seen where the termites have eaten a door frame to the top of the door frame on the first floor of a house. Wow. It's fairly common. It's much more common than people realize.
Yeah. Yep, I know. I didn't realize it was so common, honestly. I've heard of termites, but
Yeah.
never had really
And the
encountered
father,
them.
you know, and again, you know, we're in our office in Brunswick, Maine.
Yeah.
It's not as common in Maine as it is in other areas. When you get into, you know, some of the southern part of the areas that we service, Massachusetts, southern New Hampshire, the termites are extremely, extremely common.
Wow. There we go. And so, is it likely then that termites would actually end up damaging other features of your home besides wood, as you know, as a result, like you know, your insulation or electrical or drywall or
Probably not as a rule. Again, you know, I mean, their food source is the wood. That's what they get their nutrition from. You know, could you get some cursory damage where they chew through something? It can happen. It's not likely that it's going to cause structural problems, though, by them doing that. As far as things in your house, you know, like this wooden desk, again, probably not that likely, but it's all situational.
yeah.
You know, I've seen buildings with termites where they had stuff stored in the basement.
Okay. Yeah.
And you know,
Maybe
cardboard
having
boxes,
it, yeah.
cardboard boxes with some moisture in it, and they had damaged stuff that was in the boxes and had fed on the boxes themselves, things like that.
Right,
So,
yeah.
and again, it depends on the type of termite. You know, if we're talking about subterraneans, if you happen to have something that, in fact, I should have brought it. I have a picture frame in my office that was damaged by drywood termites. You know, so you might find something like that if you happen to get, you know, an oddball piece like that. And this actually came from a store in southern Maine that was returned by a customer. But the wood probably came from another part of the country. But
So yeah.
theoretically, could you bring something like that into your house that had termites in it, and then have, you know, those termites
Right.
move into another part of the house and be damaging something? It's a possibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But maybe not as likely. Yeah.
No, not as likely. No.
All right. So, you know, what's the best method of getting rid of them?
If you have a termite problem, you definitely have a problem that is not a DIY type of a situation. You really need to hire, you know, when you think about the potential damage that they do, you really should be hiring a professional to do that. You know, there are materials that are registered to use for termites, but to do a termite treatment properly, if you're using a liquid material, you need special tools and equipment, and you have to have a very clear understanding of how to do that. Most of the termite work we do now is done with baits, but it's still you still need to know what you're doing to be able to do this. It's really not what I would recommend for the average homeowner to try to take on.
Right. Especially with the consequences that are,
Yes. Yeah.
you know, as a result of not doing it.
Yes.
correctly.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So then, what can I expect from a termite service from Modern Pest?
Well, first it's going to be you know, a detailed inspection so we know exactly what you're dealing with. Verify that you do have termites. We're not structural engineers, so we can't tell you, you know, the extent of the damage, but we certainly would look for evidence of damage when we're doing an inspection. And as I said, most of the termite work that we do now is done with baits, so we're actually installing bait stations that have an insect growth regulator in the bait. It's a highly compressed form of cellulose that the termites are very attracted to. It's actually more attractive to them because the cellulose content is so pure than this piece of wood is. But again, it's all subject to that random foraging. They're not actually attracted to it, it's just random foraging. Once the first termites find that, they leave those pheromone trails. They will you know, consume a great amount of this bait. So mostly we're putting bait stations around the outside of the house. Sometimes, though, that involves drilling sidewalks and patios and different things so that you can get them where they need to be. Again, you know, you need the right tools to do this with. If you've got mud tubes going up the foundation, or even inside of the house, in the basement, things like that, we will put an above ground bait station over those mud tubes so that the termites will actually. What we're doing is providing them with an alternate food source. Right. And this material only affects them when they molt, so that they can't molt properly, which causes them to die. It's very effective. It is very environmentally sound in comparison to before this product came out. These types of products, there's several different ones on the market. Before these types of products came out, to do a termite treatment, you were pumping hundreds of gallons of insecticide into the soil around a structure. We try to avoid doing that if at all possible. This is certainly, the bait is certainly our primary go-to tool for termite elimination.
And so how long then does it take for that service to really be effective? Or does it vary, or?
It's actually quite effective quite quickly, and again, it's dependent upon that random foraging and them finding this. But research from the manufacturer of this product, they say on average that you can eliminate the colony, and that's a big thing too, because you're actually eliminating the termite colony, where with a liquid you're putting a barrier around the structure to try to prevent it. This actually eliminates the colony. It's an average of between 60 and 70 days to eliminate a colony, but you may have multiple colonies, so
it doesn't end there.
It doesn't necessarily end there.
Yeah.
You may have one colony feeding on one side of the house, another one feeding somewhere else on the house. So, and just like with most things, you've got conducive conditions. Nature fills the void. If you eliminate the termites that are there, doesn't mean that another colony is not going to find that a conducive area and through swarming, ending up establishing another colony there.
So preventative is definitely.
It really is, and relatively speaking, the cost to do this is quite reasonable. It's less expensive to do a termite treatment now than it was 25 years ago. Because of the difference in the materials, and for most people, your largest investment that you have is your home. So it's almost like an insurance policy and it's to protect your house, and it's a relatively minimal amount of money for what you're getting.
Right.
So if I had termites in my house. So far, so good. I haven't. I would have this done, and I would continue to do this as long as I owned it, just because there is that risk. And it's just, would you drive your car without insurance? That you're spending, depending on what you're driving for a car, anywhere from $20,000 to $50,000, $60,000 maybe. Would you drive that without having insurance on it? And to me, having a termite service to protect your structure, especially if you're in those areas where they're really prone to being attacked by termites,
right.
I would absolutely not even consider not having a.
We did for a second. Sorry about that, everyone. Facebook acting up on us. We'll blame it on them. Sorry, Facebook.
Yeah, it just seems weird. We just lose that connection. I don't understand it.
Well, I think we wrapped that up for the most part. So I didn't have any more questions unless someone chimes in the next few seconds. I'm just going to wrap things up here. So that was great. A lot of good information, and appreciate that, Mike.
Sure.
So we'll be back in a couple weeks.
What are we talking about? I don't remember.
Planned. I feel like it was.
I don't recall.
I'm going to say bug related.
Probably more so than rodent related this time of year. Yes, but we'll be back with something. We'll find something to talk about.
Absolutely, and you're welcome to chime in and give us your ideas as well if you have certain pest issues that you want to know about. So let us know. You can also check back with us at modernpest.com if you have any other questions. Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Have a good day.
Bye.